What up? What up? Welcome back to the Simply Secure podcast. I'm your host, Eddie Thomason, and I'm joined today with an incredible mind that's inside of the cybersecurity space, talking to you guys about some of the tips and tricks that he's learned along the way. And I think you guys are you just got to buckle up. You got to strap in because the information that he's going to share is absolutely incredible. And he has a small little twist about showing his face. So I'm very excited for you guys to see who he is if you're going to be watching this on YouTube. But if you follow him on any other social medias, you won't actually see what his face looks like. So before I start getting into the weeds and diving a little bit too deep into some of the background, I'm going to go ahead and let my guest introduce himself. So go ahead, my man, introduce yourself. Let the people know what you're excited about.
Hey Eddie, I'm Mishaal Khan, and I come from a background of IT, cybersecurity. I am currently the virtual CISO at an organization, and I also dabble a lot in open source intelligence, or OSINT, as well as privacy management. So I do a couple of things here and there.
That's awesome. Like I said, Michelle, you have a plethora of information, man, a plethora of knowledge and wisdom as it pertains to the space in itself. But I also know that you have a passion for educating and talking to people, right? And I know we're going to dive a little bit into the episode in itself. But as you know, I'm a huge, huge, huge Marvel fan. So I always like to know people's origin stories, where they come from. I see you got obviously some Marvel pictures and artwork in the background of you as well. So I feel like we share that in itself. But let the people know, my man, what's your origin story? How did you get into this space overall?
Yeah, no, that's it's good to know that I can see a shield in your back as well, and the Thor hammer.
Yep.
So always good to see another Marvel fan. But yeah, I started off quite early in my career. My dad used to have a computer repair shop, and that kind of gave us exposure to all sorts of hardware, computer hardware. Started off with the early computers like the Pentium 1s and the x86s. So I want to say since grade 8, I had this extreme passion for hardware, where I studied electronics 101 books, and it kind of piqued my interest into how computers are made. And from then on, I was sure that I wanted to do computer engineering at a very young age. And that led to some programming skills when the internet was still kind of new out there. So I learned some HTML, some CSS, and started making websites. As you start building stuff, you also start breaking stuff. And that's what kind of got me into hacking. The essence of hacking was how stuff is made, how to build it, how to break it, how to kind of break some of the games. So as I used to play a lot of these initial games that were out there, I remember Doom 2, and a few others. I used to dabble in the cheat codes and find out, how do I skip levels? How do I break the game? Looking at text files, configuration files, and just changing a few variables here and there, and it just skipped a level or whatnot. So those were the fun things as I was growing up. Little did I realize that was laying down the foundation of an ethical hacker, so to speak. And as I started my career, it was mostly on the networking side. I was doing a lot of Cisco networking, and I worked for them for a while. That led me into security. It gave me a lot of exposure on the network security side. And to be honest, I hated security when I started, because my exposure to security was network security, how to secure switches, routers, and firewalls. And that was kind of boring. And I didn't see a use case for it. I couldn't tell people about it. Hey, I secured a switch today, or I prevented a DDoS attack, whatever. It's not exciting. And so then I kind of transitioned into ethical hacking. I'm like, I have this skill. I can break stuff. I can break websites. I can get into accounts. It's not that difficult. So then I started getting some certifications around security. All of it was self-study. Nobody would give me a security job initially because I had no security experience, even though I had years and years of security experience, but it didn't really count. So I made my own company. I'm like, okay, if no one's going to give me a job, I'll start my own company. So I started my own startup, started getting jobs for pen testing, ethical hacking, social engineering, phishing emails, and I built my reputation around it then eventually started getting jobs around security. And eventually, here I am as a virtual CISO now, consulting on the side of security. And I still do a couple of pen testing here and there. But that's
Mhm.
essentially how I kind of transition into this. And as you can see, I'm I have a very curious personality.
Yes.
I'm never satisfied in the position I'm in. Always want to grow, and I always am looking for that next best thing.
Absolutely. And it's funny because I've learned in every single career that's very important. Having that mindset of like, I always want to learn and I always want to grow. But I will say in the cybersecurity industry, that is so much more valuable, I think, than any other
Hmm.
career in itself. Maybe outside of medical and things like that, right? You always want to
Hmm.
learn those things, but in cyber, things change so quick, right? Like
Right.
so fast that if you're not willing to change or not willing to expose yourself to different softwares or tools and things like that, then you're pretty much dying already, right?
Hmm.
Like your
Yep.
value as a person and as a contributor to that organization is instantly dying. It's going backwards. So
Agreed.
I love that you're that person, right? Like you kind of embodied this idea of I'm naturally curious. I always want to learn. I always want to figure out some new stuff.
Hmm.
Now, what I will say real quick, or I guess instead of say, I'll ask, I'm curious because we've seen this vCISO title pop up a bunch now, right?
Hmm.
And for you, for some people, I know there's some backlash and some stuff in the industry. Like, hey, some people put vCISO out there, but they don't really have the experience. They're just kind of throwing it out there. Whereas though, obviously, there's people like you who've been in security for years, right? And you really have the experience to back it all up. I'm just curious to know your perspective on the role of a vCISO, right? Like why is that role important and why is it popping up so much today?
Yeah, there are essentially two types of CISOs out there, and that's where the confusion is around background. There's a business CISO or a BISO, and then there's a CISO that comes from the technical side. And on the technical side, yes, you absolutely need the experience on systems, on security protocols, security products, and stuff like that. But on the business side, you don't. That's where you need to understand around business impact, how the company functions, what their threats are, what are they trying to fight, what are they trying to defend themselves from. A CISO, a well-rounded CISO, has both types of qualities. And to your point, yes, every organization needs security. Obviously, everyone is getting hacked left, right, and center, but they don't have a handle on it. And a CISO's responsibility is to manage the security program of a company, whether small or large. The position of a CISO traditionally has been reserved only for the enterprises, and I want to say the large enterprises, simply because there's so much responsibility for a CISO. And they don't last more than a year and a half to 2 years. That's the average lifespan of a CISO. It's primarily burnout. And this is where the position of the virtual CISO came, also known as a fractional CISO, where a CISO can spend some of their time for an organization, a mid-sized to a large organization that traditionally could not afford a full-time CISO and could not maintain their cybersecurity program. So CISO's job is to understand it, develop it, and create policies, procedures around it. And at the end of the day, the goal is to have a more mature security practice for the organization. And the vCISO is bridging that gap and fulfilling that requirement for the mid market, I believe.
Hmm. I love that. I love that you just broke down, first of all, the two different types of CISOs from a business perspective and the technical side, right? Because it's very true. You need to have, typically, I would say most companies and organizations will prefer a BCISO, like a BISO, right?
Mhm.
Over a vCISO because they feel as though the business CISO can hire the team that can actually do the technical stuff. But I still want to have somebody that's going to be in like my C suite that understands the business and the impact that security has on the business so that we can
Right.
like make proper predictions and forecasts as we scale. Right.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
that's really cool. That's really cool in itself. And
Yeah, I
now,
feel,
oh, go
yeah, no,
ahead.
sorry. I feel it's important to understand technology. If you're in the technology field, sure, it's important to understand business. But if you're in charge of defending your organization from cyber threats, these hackers don't understand business. They understand technology very well. They know how to hurt your reputation, get your data. So I feel a CISO at the minimum should understand how technology works. By no means do they need to be an expert in it, but they need to understand, basics of how email security works, how web security works, what is network security. And no one's asking them to be a professional in it. That's why you have a team you can delegate, and then you have partners, you have MSSPs to do a lot of that work. But at a minimum, they need to understand both sides, the technical and the business impact. One without the other makes of an incomplete CISO.
Absolutely. And you brought up a couple of different points inside of there that I want to dive deeper into. Um, one of them being, I'm just curious because I know one of the things that we talked about pre-call is diving into the idea of OSINT, right? And looking at the technical capacity of a CISO and understanding that OSINT a lot of times is a very focused type of expertise, right? It's kind of like if you got security at the top, you're really kind of digging down deep into layers to get to the OSINT piece of it. What
Mhm.
is your perspective on a CISO in general? It doesn't even have to be a vCISO, whatever else it may be. But if you're calling yourself a CISO, what capacity do you need to know about OSINT and those pieces? And if you do, actually, it's probably better. Tell us
Yeah,
what
it's
OSINT is first, and then
right.
go back and answer
Okay.
that
Yeah,
question.
I'll start with OSINT. So OSINT is just simply Googling something.
Mhm.
Not really. So I hate it when people kind of describe OSINT as, yeah, it's just glorified Googling. It's not. So it's it starts with searching, but so let's define it first. So open source intelligence is all the information you can obtain freely without any restrictions and available to anyone and everyone online. You take that data and you turn it into something meaningful called intelligence, and then you'll take action on it. So that's essentially what OSINT is. It's mostly free information, freely available, but it could be behind a paywall as well. That's at least how I define it. But it's basically a collection of all information that's available, and it needs to be because when you're doing investigation of any sort, you need to be able to reproduce it. If you can't reproduce it, if someone else cannot reproduce it because you had some premium data sets or some information that no one else has, then it's kind of useless. You can't present it to court, you can't prove your point, and whatnot. But OSINT is not only used for investigators, it is also used for journalists, for threat hunters, for ethical hacking in the reconnaissance phase when you're trying to kind of map out the adversary's infrastructure. You need OSINT for that. So there's a lot of use cases. But back to your original question on what is OSINT, um, let me try to explain it more with examples. So if I'm looking up you, for example, if you're my person of interest, so to speak, and by the person of interest could be, a person, the target could be you, it could be an organization, it could be misinformation, it could be digging up for fake news and seeing, verifying what the true story is. So it could be any of those targets. So, but in most cases, it's a person of interest. So if it's you, I'll start looking up everything about you using OSINT skills. For example, where you live, your phone number, your email address. A lot of this can be obtained through public databases. People search websites, they're called as. And then I can look into breached data. If any of your emails has ever been breached, which it most likely has, almost everyone is in a data breach nowadays. I can look up your old passwords, or maybe you're still reusing those passwords on other websites. I may find a password on, let's say, LinkedIn, but then that password is the same as your whatever Facebook or Instagram password, even though it may not have been breached. Or I can figure out more information from your password. A password may contain a spouse's name, a kid's name, or your interest. It may say Superman or Hulk or some Marvel character, most likely. But those are the things I can get. Now that's information. I'm not after passwords. I'm not after something that's sensitive, but I'm just after general information in the first phase. And then I can dive deeper. This is stuff that everyone can understand. But then OSINT goes way, way deeper. I can look into your birth records, marriage records, divorce records, and those records may have your signatures in it, or a court record. Maybe you were speeding somewhere, and I can see where you were speeding tickets. All of this is mostly public information in the US, at least, which is kind of disturbing. I've gotten social security numbers of people just by looking at court records. People ask me, how do you get social security numbers? Well, the government has them on most government websites, and they don't redact it. So it's amazing the amount of info you can get. You can get voting records. I can see where your political alliances lie. I can see who you donated to, which political party. All of that is, again, public info. And by the way, all of these things I mentioned cannot be Googled because these are behind a search criteria or a login screen, or this is called the deep web. So instead of the surface web, now I'm looking more into the deep web. And then there's all these breached databases, which are probably gray area for some investigations. But I've downloaded almost all the major breaches that are out there. So I searched through my hard drive, look through that info, and kind of connect the dots. So at the end of the day, when you have all this information about your person of interest, and then obviously social media and friends and family, you create this entire dossier of the person. And once you have everything in place, now you start connecting the dots. So now if your purpose is to connect this person to a certain event or incident, let's say it's threat hunting, you want to figure out who the hacker is based on an IP address or based on one seed information, I call it. So you have one piece of seed information, you want to pivot off of that. You keep pivoting over and over and over until you get those connections that you're after. And there's always a goal here. So I'm all over the place right now, just trying to give you an idea of the type of information you can get. But once you have all this information, half of it may be irrelevant, but you don't know at this point. So you keep collecting, and then you create this big mind map, and you start connecting the dots. It could simply be a background check on you, on someone else, and here's all the information we see about this person publicly available. So that's the essence of OSINT when it comes to searching for people and personality, and that in itself exposes a lot about you. And then we can talk about, okay, how do we protect a person if a lot of their sensitive data is being exposed online? Now that falls more under threat protection and privacy protection.
Right, man. So, like you said, OSINT, it's so deep. You can like, I love the term that you use. It's a deep. I think you called
Deep
it a
web.
deep web. Yes,
Mhm.
like a deep search. It's a much deeper than the surface level, right? And I'm just curious because I have no idea. Like this is the first time I've been exposed to OSINT and what it looks like and some of the different pieces behind it, right? Because you mentioned having a what you can do on Google and what you can find on Google, but then a lot of these other breaches and some of the other information is available through little logins, right? It's behind some type of login screen. Are those login screens free for like your membership, or do you typically have to pay for memberships to get access to those logins? Just curious if that information is
Yeah.
actually still free, or if
Good,
it it's behind some type of pay membership or something too.
right. Good question. So I primarily deal with only freely available information because the line of work that I do, I need for someone else to reproduce it. So if I'm giving it to law enforcement, hey, I found a stalker, a hacker, and by the way, I do a lot of that on the side as well. I help people uh, get rid of problems. Like if someone's bothering them or someone's hacked them, or it's mostly issues like that. And so I need to reproduce that information. So it cannot be behind a paywall, so to speak. It can't be a database or a website that I pay for. You'll find many of these, but I would stay clear of almost all of these because they all get it from publicly available sources as well, and they just compile it into a nice little dashboard where you can search through. So my methods are all freely available information. And when I say behind a login screen, this could be government databases. So if you want to check someone's voting records, go to any state's website, and every state will be slightly different, but a lot of them will simply ask for your name, your date of birth, and pretty much it, and maybe a zip code. So I know Florida asks only for name and date of birth, so you can pretty much look at anyone's records there. And if you know a person's date of birth, which is you can search for it, you can find out their voting preferences. So that's what I mean. This is more of a deep search. You can't Google something like this unless someone has already published it on a website. That's a different scenario. But stuff like this, violations, traffic violations, you can't really Google a traffic violation. If the person has a mugshot, then sure, they'll be on some website, which you can Google. But something like a court record, you have to search through it, through maybe create a free login on that website, or just search through their search criteria. And that's what I mean by going through a couple of steps before you actually get to the information. And that's more of that's categorized generally as the deep web. So there's the surface web, which is Googleable. There's deep web, which is usually behind a login or some other form of search queries. And then there's the dark web, which is a whole different story.
It's a dangerous place. It's a bad place.
No one needs to be there.
Right. That's where Dark Vader hangs out with all those peoples.
Right.
But I do want to dive into Mishaal, man. How do you, I guess, because one of the things you brought up offline that I thought was very interesting is your ability to make your entire digital footprint disappear. Right? Like,
Mhm.
I thought that was very interesting in the fact that, listen, like we live in a technological world. Anybody who's born, I would say, year 2003 or later, right? You pretty much were born into a digital, like you already had digital footprint. I would say back
Right.
then, as we were already putting stuff on Facebook, you're already, babies, all your pictures and stuff is still out there. But you have a service that basically says like, oh no, we can literally take you off the internet and nobody can find what your face looks like.
Right.
How do
Absolutely.
you accomplish that with OSINT? How does that work? Just kind of dive into that.
Yeah, it starts with the OSINT. So let me backtrack a little. So people don't realize how much information there is out there. You touched a little bit on the surface on what obvious information is there about people, but people don't correlate that with safety or harm or how it can be abused. Know that the bad guys, when looking at that information, will use it against you, no matter how harmless it may look like. Oh, it's just a picture, it's just my family, it's just a dog, it's just a whatever. All of that information, as we know as cybersecurity professionals, that's used in social engineering attacks. If we want a password reset, or if I want to call your bank, they're going to ask me basic questions about you. Your favorite car, your favorite whatever actor, movie, this or that. Whatever question there is, it can all be searched through social media if you're posting about it. And that's how social engineering attacks work. But there's a worse side to this, and there's doxing. If somebody gets all your information, your social security number, and where you live, your parents' information, your family's information, and just posts it online for others to abuse, that's doxing them. Then you start getting all these random attacks that you cannot control anymore. Or even worse, swatting, which is calling the SWAT team on your house. So many incidences have happened where gamers playing a game, one person called the cops on the other person's home because their home address was exposed, and they knew everything about them, and they came in and shot the person. There's so many stories like that. There's stories about stalkers, which almost every household has one story to tell about, someone who's making their life miserable because they found information online. Now they're using it against them, or something as bad as revenge porn. That's something that's happening all the time right now. People share explicit images with their either boyfriends, girlfriends, or exes or whatever, and then they take those images, post it online, and start ruining the reputation of individuals. Now they come to me and they're like, what do we do? The damage has been done from all this basic information. How do we scrub ourselves from the internet? How do we make the bleeding stop? And that's a difficult conversation to have, because obviously, just like in what we do in cybersecurity, we say it's proactive measures are always better than reactive. Once you've been hacked, you've been hacked. You can't really do much. Similar is the story with privacy and intelligence, that once you've been exposed in that way, once the damage is done, it's really hard to kind of go back to it. But there's a way. I mean, so that's what I do. Since having the ability to search and dig up information is very important, I say dig it up on yourself. Do your own OSINT on your home, your phone number, your email address, whatever information you can find, and then start erasing it little by little. So I've created this free website called operationprivacy.com, and I put in all the it's a pretty large checklist of things everyone should be looking at and doing in terms of privacy. It has sections around digital privacy. What should I do in terms of my email or encryption or encrypted chatting applications or my operating system? How do I make it more private, my browsers? And then about home privacy, how do I list my home? Should I create an LLC, a trust? Same thing with your vehicles. And then the majority of that website is basically around people search websites, how to get your information off of it. And it's surprisingly easy. Most things can be taken down very easily. It's called an opt-out request. So you just ask the website. They usually have a procedure, because the legitimate ones need to follow law. So law like the California Privacy Act allows California residents at least to take their information out. It's called the right to be forgotten. And GDPR is one of those compliances or regulations out there for European citizens, where a website, if they abide by it, has to take down the information. For the rest of them that don't, there's ways on how to request it. You would request an opt-out. They'll either have a form, or you can send them a letter. If things become really difficult, you can ask the hosting provider, hey, they're hosting something illegal, or they shouldn't, or they have my personal information, take it down. So that's another way. If nothing works, you can simply ask Google and say, take down that search engine result from the website. This website is hosting my phone number or my social security or whatever, or an image that I have copyright to because it's my image. Google will comply and they'll delist it. They won't take the website down. They don't have that power, but at least you can search it. And OSINT starts from Googling. So not just Google, but Google, Bing, DuckDuckGo. You can ask all of them and say, hey, delist this. It'll take some time, but they will delist it. So there's so many techniques to take down something. And that's partly what I consult on. Since I know how to get the information, I'm like, okay, here's how to get rid of it as well.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. And for everybody listening, I'll definitely tag that in the show notes, that website that Mishaal just mentioned, because if this is you, or you know somebody who's like, man, I know they've been a victim of revenge porn, or they've been a victim of some of the different things that Mishaal already mentioned, this will be a very valuable resource to help them take control of their identity, especially in a digital space, in the digital world, right? So I appreciate you sharing that, Mishaal. So real quick, I guess dive a little bit deeper into this thought of actually doing the work to identify what is out there about you, right? Like, can you take us through a quick high level overview of the steps you take starting out? Like, somebody came to you and said, hey, I think, I know my identity is compromised. Let's say that compromised online, right? What are you first doing? Or actually, this might be more interesting, because I don't know if you actually did this for me or not. So this might be a stab in the dark. But when Alex introduced us, I don't know if you ever did a Google search on Eddie or anything like that. Did you go through that process? Like, who is this guy, and kind of start doing your own thing by habit?
It's yeah, I was just gonna say it's habit now. So anytime before I'm looking at someone or about to speak to someone, I'll do a basic search. I'll spend 5 minutes on looking a person up, And mind you, my 5 minutes are probably equivalent to someone else's half an hour of searching.
Yeah.
But I look up someone, basic information, and my purpose is just to know enough about the person so that I'm not diving into something blind. And I know a little bit about the person's background, so I know how to connect with them. So this comes from the social engineering background and training that I've gotten. Is basically, if you want to have better rapport with someone, connect better with them, you need to know a little bit about them, their background. Like for your example, it's pretty obvious from the background I see. You're a Marvel fan, I'm a Marvel fan, so we already have that connection. Our backgrounds are similar in cybersecurity, and those are the type of things I'm looking for when I'm kind of initially doing my background search on any person. And this brings us to a good point, because I'm often asked to do a background check or background search on personalities by big companies. So some CEO will come up and say, "Hey, we want to take your services and do a background check on this individual because we're about to engage in some multi-million dollar deal. We want to have leverage." And that's a very important key word, because of the basic background information that you get about a person. When you know enough about a person, you have leverage. You can use that information for influence. So it's not a bad thing, but if you know enough about a person, you have those little triggers and say, I shouldn't speak about this, or maybe this person's a Chicago Bulls fan. I'm not into basketball, but let me talk about Michael Jordan every now and then. This way the person will like me better. So now I'm using that information for my own purposes, for that person to like me better, to get my way done. This is more on the side of social engineering, but these little things, these little cues here and there, provide a lot of leverage to you. And when the other person knows nothing about you, now you have the upper hand in the conversation. And now you have the power of influence against that person. And this is exactly what bad guys use. Instead of the word influence, they use manipulation. They'll call you and say, hey, this is the IRS. We've all had that call or scam, and saying, we're going to call the cops on your house and this is where you live. And then now they have leverage because they know so much about you and you know nothing about the caller in return. So that's why that information is needs to remain private, some of it, because now it's a safety issue.
Right. So this is a question I think everybody would love to ask you, because I'm pretty sure we've all experienced this infamous call, right? Because you brought up the IRS call. But how do I remove myself from these stupid auto warranty call logs that people keep on mentioning or calling my phone about?
Well, yeah, it gets too annoying nowadays. I mean, I want to say in the past I would have said stop spreading your phone number, but that technique no longer works, because I have brand new phone numbers. I have like a dozen voice over IP phone numbers, brand new. I get it from a provider, and I start getting these same calls, and you get the same area code that you're in. They just change the last four digits, so they're getting smarter and smarter. It's basically robotic calls, which everyone will eventually get, and they're spoofing their own numbers. My policy now is I just don't answer the phone if I don't know the number. If they're already not in my contact list and it's an unknown number, why answer it? Because the chances of it being a scam or you wasting your time are now immense. In the past, that wasn't an issue. And if it's really a legit caller, they'll leave a message, or they'll send an SMS, or they'll write an email before they call. No one just calls like that if it's business related or whatnot. If it's an emergency, they will definitely leave a message. So that's my new policy. I'm like, you can't fight it. This is more of an issue of the telecom providers. The telecom providers need to get their security and verification in place, because they can easily verify caller ID. They can prevent spoofing using certain authentication protocols, sort of like the HTTPS concept, where it's end-to-end kind of encrypted from browser to server. They can do the same thing. Unless a person is verified, they shouldn't be able to place that call. And those protocols have been there. They know about them for decades now. They just don't implement it because of marketing, because of the money involved in such tools. So it's a big there's a bigger picture behind why they don't implement more controls around preventing such robocall type attacks. But us as consumers, yeah, I mean, I would say step one is look yourself online on people search websites. And if you see your information there, start removing it. So the first step is removal of information. Once you're satisfied that my personal information like home address and phone number and email cannot be found easily, then you start preventing it from ever resurfacing. Now you have to change your habits. You can't go to McDonald's and they ask you for your phone number and email address or whatever, or some coffee shop, and just provide it. No, you have to stop with those bad habits and spreading your own information. And then you have to kind of have an infrastructure. I call it a privacy infrastructure in place, where you already have a VoIP number in place to hand out to whoever asks. You have a burner email address, multiple email addresses that are junk. And next time the doctor's office asks you for your email address, don't give your real email address. Give that alias email address. You'll still get the emails, but they won't be able to abuse it. The moment they abuse it, you just block that alias, or you change it up. So there's many of those techniques available. And at the end of the day, it's important to know that everyone's threat level is different. You and I are sort of in the public every now and then, so we need to have our voices, our faces, our presence, our physical presence in certain areas, because we're in sales and cybersecurity and promoting a certain practice. Our threat levels are different than someone who's a celebrity or a politician or someone who's just a nobody and has no online presence. Their threat level is going to be very different than others. So know what your threat levels are, what could go wrong, and then be proactive about it. So not everyone needs to go to extreme privacy, but everyone needs to be at a certain basic level. It's sort of like this the security conversation you and I probably always have with our clients is everyone needs that baseline security posture. You need to be at a certain comfortable level, but not everyone needs to go extreme in the security controls. It's only on a threat basis and a risk level. How much are you willing to risk?
Right. So we probably got time for one more question. And the thing that I'm curious about, because you brought up, and I'm gonna take this back a little bit, because you brought up the idea of using OSINT to give yourself more influence in a conversation, right? And then you also said that the bad guys call this manipulation over influence. How do you play that fine line, right? Like how do you how do you make sure that you're in the aspect of when you do your research, and maybe you're researching a new client, or you're researching something about a organization, a business, or like you said, somebody that maybe you're just jumping on a podcast with, right? How do you leverage that information that you now have of that individual and make sure that you're literally just using it for a influence type of situation, right? Or an aspect of, hey, I just want to add value here or find true connecting points, compared to I want to manipulate this person to do what I want them to do
Right.
because I have my own individual agenda.
Right. So that's a very good question, and I teach this early on to students when asked, when they're trying to get into hacking, ethical hacking, security. I'm like, that word ethical is very important. That's what separates you from the bad guys. And you're right. There is a fine line between it, because information gives you power. With great information comes great responsibility. So, so
Okay,
there's
Uncle Ben.
so you have to use it wisely, because a lot of the times you'll see information that can easily be abused. And if you abuse it, then obviously you're the bad guy. And this is where your ethics lie. And a lot of the times when I'm doing background research on a person, or they want to hire me for a gig, and I see something shady or fishy in their profile, maybe they have a criminal record that's questionable. So not saying criminal record is a bad thing, but let's say they were trying to hide something from me. I've seen people who have, I was helping a friend out once for a marriage proposal, and this girl had she had one past divorce in her thing, and she told him about it. She's like, "Yeah, I've been divorced once." So they're fine with it and stuff. When I looked through her records, I could only find that one divorce because he asked me to do a background check. But then I looked at her past residences where she had lived in the last 10, 20 years. Then I looked at those counties, and those county records, she had another divorce record. So she was divorced twice. And I told my friend that, and that basically ended up with them fighting over it because he was like, "Oh, you lied about this." Like, "Oh, you didn't need to know," and this and that. And so it was that piece of truth that made the difference for them moving on. And for me, it was important to reveal this. I'm like, a marriage cannot be based on a lie. So it was a difficult thing for me. I'm like, I don't want to break you guys apart, but I want to have you start on the right footing. So that's a more of a basic example. But a lot of the times I've seen people with major criminal records approaching me to, "Hey, can you uh, clean my record online?" And I look at those people. I'm like, "No, you're on your own. I don't help criminals. I don't help people who have bad intention, who are hiding stuff from me. I'm like, be honest with me, and we'll find a way." So there's that fine line. I don't help everyone with these tactics. Same thing on the ethical hacking side. If a company asks for a certain hacking job or whatever, and I feel it's borderline shady or gray area, obviously I will push back on it. I want to say 90% of the deals I reject, in all cases, because it's not worth my reputation. I do this because of the reputation. I don't do this for money. I don't do this for anything else. It's fun. I'm good at it, but it's my reputation at stake. If something goes wrong, I'm the one who's going to be blamed. So there's a lot of responsibility that goes into this. So back to your influence versus manipulation argument, it's a very dangerous and a slippery slope to deal with. You want to use influence. So influence is a positive thing. It's if you benefit from it and I benefit from it because of the information that I have about you or the conversation, then that's influence because we both end up benefiting from the conversation. It makes for a happier ending for both of us, where we both walk out of it and say, "That was a good conversation. That was a good deal. That was a everything that happened is positive." Manipulation is one side influences. I'm sorry. Manipulation is one side benefits from it. I benefited because I got to use the information against you. I got my purposes. This is exactly what a hacker would do or a scammer would do. They'd get your money or they'd get whatever, their influence, and you feel bad. At the end of the day, you feel used and disgusted at what just happened here. And those are the types of things I'm trying to prevent. And I'm trying to protect people from never being in that position where they can be used or manipulated. So, yes, there's a fine line with that. And if we're not conscious about it, we may end up on the other side. And you hear all these stories of hackers on their origin stories, on how they were bad, they went to jail, then they became good. It's because they weren't given that initial lecture around ethics. They knew the skill sets, but they used it for bad because it gave them immediate results and power, basically. So there's a lot of abuse of power that can happen, but as professionals, we need to be cognizant of that and teach this to the next generation. That's why I do a lot of these public speaking engagements. I want to teach people how to kind of hone in these skills and use it for good.
Mhm. It's funny. Have you ever saw the movie Hitch
Yeah.
with Will Smith and Kevin
Uh-huh.
James? I,
Yes.
I feel like what you just described is Hitch's process of going through and picking the right people that he wants to work with and valuing his reputation.
Right.
That's literally as soon as you started talking, I was like, bro, he's like the cybersecurity Hitch. This is great. Like,
Never thought of it that way, but interesting.
but you're actually, you're a real life person and not just a fictional character, so that also helps. But Mishaal, I think, man, like I said, you always have a wealth of knowledge, a wealth of information to continue to give and provide. Before we chop this one here, I just want to let not actually. I want you to let the people know how they can find you. What's the best way to connect with Mishaal? How do they find you? because you're such a disappeared person online anyways.
So I try to keep that balance between privacy and how much I reveal. And it's important to know that it's actually much easier to completely disappear off the internet. It'll take some time, but it's not impossible. What's even more difficult is to keep that balance. I want to hide my personal information online for safety reasons because of the type of work I do. So I never want to reveal where I live, like my home address, because the adversaries may come and reach me, or my email address that I use for important stuff, or my phone numbers to prevent spamming and blackmailing or sim swapping and stuff like that. So those are the things I try to protect. But yes, I am online. I'm on LinkedIn. You can find me on LinkedIn. Um, uh, that's more to communicate and interact with others in the professional field. You will not find me on Facebook or Instagram or any of the other social media that has little value to me specifically. Um, I, Even though I do have a lot of alias accounts on those websites for investigative purposes, but if you want to find me, I think the best way is LinkedIn, or you can go to mishaalkhan.com. That's the domain I own, and I have basic information there. Like my LinkedIn link is there, and a Twitter link. Twitter is only for following the news and stuff. So I primarily use social media to connect to people and to advertise any talk I'm giving, or for people to reach out to me. Because at the end of the day, if I've taken this on to help others using my skill sets, then others need to have a way to reach out to me, and that's my method initially.
To see what his face looks like on any of those profiles, guys. I just want you to know. So the only place you can see what he looks like is on the YouTube video in itself.
Uh-oh.
But I
What
will
have I
definitely
done?
link. I will definitely link Mishaal's LinkedIn profile, his Twitter profile, as well as his company website, so you guys can continue to learn from this guy, man. Get involved inside of his community and really start to understand his mission, his thought process, and the things that he's working on to make our privacy more secure, our security more secure, and just dive deeper into your own personal identity. So with that, I appreciate you guys checking in to another episode of the Simply Secure podcast, and we will see you guys again on the next one.